On our wedding day, my husband's mom whispered, "Don't worry, sweetie, he'll get over this silly marriage phase soon." During our first dance, she smiled and said, "Enjoy it while it lasts." My husband laughed. 6 months later, he begged me to take him back after his mom destroyed his life. I sent him a single text, "Enjoy it while it lasts." I should have known from the start. There were red flags, huge ones actually, but love makes you blind, and in my case, apparently deaf too. When I first met Ethan's mom, Linda, I thought she was just a little overbearing, kind of woman who thought no one would ever be good enough for her son, which fine, whatever. I figured she'd warm up to me eventually. I was so wrong. From day one, she made it painfully clear that she saw me as an obstacle rather than a daughter-in-law. It started small, passive-aggressive comments, backhanded compliments, and the occasional, "Oh, I just assumed Ethan would end up with someone more, well, you know." No, Linda, I don't know. But please do go on. Ethan always brushed it off. "That's just how she is," he'd say. Or worse, "She's joking, babe, don't take it so seriously." The time, I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I wasn't marrying his mother after all, I was marrying him. But looking back, I should have realized something crucial. He never once stood up for me, and that became painfully clear on our wedding day. Our wedding day was supposed to be perfect. It was the culmination of months of planning, the dream day we had both been excited about. I had the dress, the venue, the vows, all of it. But as the morning unfolded, there was an undercurrent of tension. Linda was everywhere, hovering like a hawk. She'd already made sure everything from the flowers to the seating arrangement was perfect. But it was never enough. Every time I tried to have a moment alone, she'd pop in to check on me, always with that thinly veiled criticism that I wasn't quite enough. When we went for pictures before the ceremony, I could feel her eyes on me. Every time I smiled or laughed, it seemed like she had something to say, always a subtle little jab. "Are you sure you want the veil like that? I thought you would have gone with a more elegant look, but that's fine." I laughed it off, trying to remind myself that it was just nerves. It wasn't the wedding I had imagined, but I was still marrying Ethan, the man I loved, and I told myself to focus on that. Then came the moment that I'll never forget. The family photo. After the ceremony, we gathered all the guests for group pictures. As the photographer was getting everyone arranged, Linda stepped in and immediately said, "Oh, let's do a family-only photo first." I smiled awkwardly, standing in the back as they snapped away. Ethan, his siblings, his dad, and of course Linda. It wasn't until I noticed that I had been completely left out of the family shot that I realized what was happening. I looked to Ethan, waiting for him to say something to step in, but he just shrugged and said, "You know how they are." I felt the blood drain from my face. Was I really the last person in the world who mattered to him? This wasn't a joke. This wasn't something I could ignore. I wasn't just his wife, I was his family too. But he didn't defend me, so I smiled, stepped aside, and let them take their picture without me. After the photos, I quietly slipped out of the room and walked straight to the parking lot. I needed air, or maybe I just needed a moment to let it all sink in. I had never felt more like a stranger in my own marriage. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't bring myself to walk back into the house, back into a marriage that already felt so fractured. Ethan had tried to reach me a few times after the wedding. I'd ignored his texts, his calls, his voicemails. He knew something was wrong, but I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. It wasn't just the family photo. It wasn't just the passive-aggressive comments or the subtle digs from his mother. It was the constant feeling that I was never going to be good enough for her, that I was never going to be her first choice, her ideal daughter-in-law. And more than anything, it was the way Ethan handled it. His indifference, his silence, it was like a dagger to the chest. We hadn't even been married for a year, and already I felt like a ghost in my own life, my own house. I stayed with my sister for a few days to clear my head. I needed space, but I also needed to process what had happened. There was no way I was just going to accept this. I'd made a vow to Ethan, to us, and I didn't want to let one woman, no matter how manipulative or well-meaning she thought she was, ruin that. But the longer I stayed away, the more I realized something. I couldn't do this anymore. When I finally came back to our house, Ethan greeted me like nothing had changed, like nothing had been broken. He had no idea how much pain I'd been carrying around, how his lack of support had torn me apart. His mom's words still echoed in my mind. "He'll get over this silly marriage phase soon." I didn't know if I could ever get over the feeling of being dismissed, of being made to feel like I was less than everyone else. That evening, we sat down to dinner. He smiled at me, trying to act like everything was normal. "So, how was your time with your sister?" he asked, as if he hadn't just ignored my feelings for the past several months. "It was fine," I replied, stabbing my fork into the salad, keeping my eyes on my plate. "Just needed a little space." His smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. I could see the tension in his shoulders, though. He was on edge, trying to guess whether I'd let it go or if I was going to call him out. I decided to hold off, at least for a little longer, but inside, I was already preparing to confront him. The night passed, and Ethan went to bed early, which was typical when he was trying to avoid a fight. But I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the wedding day in my head, wondering if it was too late to fix things or if the cracks had already formed too deep. I pulled my phone out, started scrolling through old pictures of us. Happy pictures. The ones where we'd gone on our first trip together, the ones from when we were dating, the ones before everything became about his family's opinion of me. I even came across one from when we first got engaged, and I could see the joy in our faces. but now felt like a distant memory. It was the next morning when I decided I'd had enough. I had spent months silently swallowing the passive-aggressive remarks, the dismissive comments, and the relentless interference of Ethan's mom, but that was over now. There was no way I could go on pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I woke up early, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat in the living room, steeling myself for what I was about to do. I wasn't sure how Ethan would react, but at that point, I didn't care. I was tired. Tired of being the good wife who didn't speak up, tired of feeling small and invisible. When he came downstairs, I could tell from the look on his face that he knew something was off. "Morning," he said, trying to be casual, but the tension was thick in the air. He sat down across from me, looking at me like I was about to drop a bomb. "Morning," I replied, taking a slow sip of my coffee. There was a long pause before I finally asked, "Ethan, what the hell is going on with your mom?" His face immediately shifted into the uncomfortable, familiar mask I had seen countless times before. The one that said, "I'm not ready to face this yet." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "What do you mean?" I put my cup down on the table and leaned forward. "I mean, what is it with her? She's never liked me, and you've never once stood up for me. You've let her walk all over me, and I can't keep pretending that's okay. I'm not your mom's punching bag." Ethan's eyes darted to the side, and I saw the shame flash across his face, but he quickly covered it up with a shrug. "It's not like that. You know how she is." "No, I don't know how she is. I've tried for years to understand, but I can't. And you don't make it any easier. Why do you let her treat me like this?" My voice wavered as I spoke, but I wasn't backing down. His hands clenched on the table. "It's just, she's my mom. I don't know what you want me to do." "Defend me," I shot back, my voice rising. "You don't defend me, Ethan. You never have." He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but the words never came. Instead, he just sat there, looking at me like I was a stranger. I stood up abruptly, the anger in my chest threatening to spill over. "I'm done, Ethan. I'm done being the second choice. I'm done with you not standing up for me, and I'm done being in a marriage where I'm constantly made to feel like I'm not enough." His expression softened for a moment, but it was too little, too late. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "I'm saying I need space. I need time to think about what I want because this isn't it," I replied, my voice firm. It wasn't easy, walking out of the house that morning. I could see the shock in Ethan's eyes, the confusion. He had no idea what was coming, no clue how badly his inaction had hurt me. He probably thought that a few days of silence would fix everything, but I wasn't going to wait around for him to figure things out anymore. I stayed with my sister again, but this time I didn't feel as comfortable as I had before. This wasn't just about needing space anymore. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that I had lost in the process of trying to please Ethan and his family. The following days were filled with texts from him, and I'm not talking about the sweet, apologetic kind that I'd hoped for. Oh no, Ethan wasn't quite there yet. Instead, his texts ranged from confused to angry, then back to pleading. "I don't understand why you're so upset. It's not like I'm picking my mom over you. I'm sorry if you feel like I've ignored you, but this is just the way she is. I can't change her. You can't just leave, not like this. We're married, you're my wife." But I couldn't ignore what had happened any longer. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. He had brushed my feelings aside for far too long, and I had let him, but now I had to stand up for myself. A week went by, and then Ethan finally showed up at my sister's place. He came to the door, looking completely disheveled, his hair messy and his eyes red from lack of sleep. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do here," he said, his voice shaky. "I can't live like this. Please, just talk to me. Let me make it right." I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and looked at him. His words were soft, but they felt hollow. After everything, I didn't know if I even wanted him to fix it. "I don't think you can fix this, Ethan," I said, my voice steady. "You let your mom walk all over me for years. You didn't stand up for me when I needed you to. And now I'm supposed to just come back and pretend like nothing happened?" He took a step forward, reaching out for me, but I stepped back. "I'm not asking for you to fix it, Ethan. I'm asking for you to change. For you to stand up for me, for us, instead of letting your mom control everything." For the first time, I saw something in his eyes, something close to regret, maybe even fear. But it was too little too late. He hadn't been there when I needed him, and now he was trying to fix a mess that had been building for years. The days after that encounter were rough, then kept trying. I'll give him credit for that. He really did try to make it right. But there was something about his attempts that felt off, like he wasn't doing it for the right reasons. Maybe he was doing it because he didn't want to lose me, or maybe because he was finally realizing that without me, his life would be empty. But whatever it was, it felt like too little too late. We tried talking things through a couple of times after that day, but each conversation always ended the same way. I'd express my hurt, my frustration, and he'd nod, apologize, and tell me how much he regretted everything. But his actions never aligned with his words. I remember one night we sat in my sister's living room, Ethan and me, but it felt like a million miles between us. He asked me again, "What do you want me to do?" And I couldn't even answer him, because I didn't know anymore. It wasn't just about getting him to stand up to his mom anymore. It was about everything that had been building up under the surface. The emotional distance, the constant pressure of being second place in his life, and the fact that deep down I knew I wasn't being treated like a priority. "I don't know, Ethan," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. I don't think I can give you an answer right now. He looked defeated. Then what does that mean for us? Are we done? I didn't answer immediately. I couldn't. It was so much more complicated than just a yes or no. The truth was, I wasn't sure what done even meant anymore. Would I be giving up on something that could work if he made some changes? Or was this the end of the road? Was I just delaying the inevitable? But deep inside, I knew what I had to do. I had to take care of myself first. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. The constant strain, the feeling of being rejected by his family, and the lack of support from the one person who was supposed to be there for me, it was all too much. I walked out of that conversation with a clear mind but a heavy heart. I knew I had made the right decision, but that didn't make it any easier. Days turned into weeks, and I did my best to move forward, even though it felt like I was dragging my heart behind me. Ethan's texts didn't stop. They were relentless. Every time my phone buzzed, I would feel a pang of guilt in my chest. I'd made the decision to separate, but letting go was harder than I had imagined. The life we had built together, the memories, the inside jokes, the dreams for the future, none of it seemed as important anymore. It had all been tainted by his mom's overbearing presence and his inability to protect our relationship from her. He showed up at my sister's place one afternoon while I was at home, unannounced as usual. When I opened the door, he stood there, his eyes desperate and pleading. "Please, just hear me out," he said, his voice hoarse. I sighed, stepping aside to let him in. "Ethan, I don't know what you want me to say. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. My mom, I don't know why I let it get this far. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this work." He looked so vulnerable, so unlike the man I had seen just months ago, the man who had stood by and let me be pushed aside. But it wasn't enough. "Ethan, you don't get it," I replied, shaking my head. "It's not just about your mom anymore. It's about us. And I don't think we're in the same place anymore. You've been so focused on trying to please her, and I've been here trying to get you to see us." His eyes welled up, but I wasn't going to let him win me over with tears. Not this time. I had already been here too many times before. "You need to fix this on your own first. I can't be the one to keep picking up the pieces every time something falls apart between you two," I added, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. He took a step closer, his face softening, but I backed away. "I don't need you to fix me, Ethan. I need you to fix us. And I'm not sure we can. I can change. I promise I'll change." I shook my head. "It's not that easy. You can't just undo years of ignoring me. You can't undo how your mom made me feel." I could see the heartbreak on his face, but it wasn't my responsibility anymore to heal his wounds. It was his job to face what had happened, to confront his own insecurities, and to choose his own path, one that didn't involve me. And with that, I stepped back into the emotional space I needed to start healing, one painful moment at a time. Weeks passed, and the weight of the situation didn't lighten. I had moved out of my sister's place and into a small apartment on my own. It was a change I wasn't expecting to make so soon, but it was necessary. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of Ethan's family drama. Still, there were days when the loneliness would hit hard. When I'd hear something funny and reach for my phone to text him, only to remember that we weren't speaking anymore. When I'd hear a couple laughing together in the street, and the pang of missing the version of Ethan I once knew would strike me all over again. But I wasn't going to let myself slip back into the cycle of giving up my own peace for his comfort. I couldn't. Ethan continued to reach out, sending me messages almost every day. Some were apologetic, others were pleading, and some were downright angry. But the thing that stood out the most were the two simple words in his last message. "I'm sorry." That's all it said. No excuses, no promises, just those two words. It was raw, unfiltered, and for the first time, it felt like he finally understood the gravity of what he had done. The hardest part of moving forward wasn't letting go of Ethan. It was realizing that I had been putting his needs above my own for so long that I had lost sight of who I really was. I was so caught up in trying to fix him, to fix us, that I had ignored my own voice. As I sat alone in my apartment that night, scrolling through his message, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't upset. But I had learned something important. I could live without him. The thought didn't scare me the way it once had. It didn't break my heart like I thought it would. In fact, it felt like a quiet relief. I didn't need him to be happy. I had myself, and that was enough. I took a deep breath and typed back, "I hope you figure it out, Ethan, but I can't keep waiting for something that may never come." I hit send and leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the city lights. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly free. It took a few more months for everything to settle, but in the end, I finally found peace. Ethan continued to reach out, but I knew by now that I couldn't go back. He had changed, well, maybe not fully, but he had shown growth. There were no more manipulative messages from his mother, no more passive-aggressive comments. He was trying to repair the damage he'd caused, but the truth was, too much had been broken for too long. Think, in a way, we both realized that we weren't the same people we had been when we first met. The tension between his loyalty to his mother and his love for me had torn us apart in ways I couldn't undo, no matter how many apologies he gave. It wasn't the kind of fairy tale ending I had envisioned when we first got married, but it was real, and for once, it was mine. A couple of months later, Ethan sent me a message that felt different. There were no demands or pleas, just a simple text. I've been working on myself. I've been trying to be better. I hope you're happy. And I'm sorry. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel that familiar weight on my chest when I read his words. There was no anger, no regret, just peace. I didn't respond because the truth was I didn't need to anymore. I had learned to find happiness without him, without anyone else's validation. I was finally living for myself, and that was all I had ever needed. As for Ethan, I wished him the best. I hoped he would learn to stand up for himself, to break free from his mom's grip, and maybe, just maybe, learn how to love someone without strings attached. But that wasn't my journey to follow anymore. With that thought in mind, I put my phone down and stood up from my couch. I smiled softly to myself, feeling the weight of the past finally lifting. I walked to the window, staring out at the city, and for the first time in ages, I felt the freedom to move forward, without looking back. Months passed, and though Ethan's attempts to reconnect started slowing down, they didn't entirely stop. I was in a place where I didn't want to be involved with him anymore, but that didn't mean I wasn't curious about what he was doing. His texts had become fewer, but every once in a while I'd get something unexpected, like a message with a picture of a concert he'd attended or a random update about his life. It was like he couldn't let go of the idea of keeping some connection, even if it wasn't going anywhere. One evening, I received a message that made my stomach flip. "I'm going to talk to my mom," he wrote. "I don't know what I'll say yet, but I need to have this conversation. I need to stop letting her control everything." I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. Part of me wanted to encourage him. Good for him, finally standing up to her. But another part of me knew that it wasn't enough anymore, that it was too little, too late. But still, was I wrong? His words dug into me because they were exactly what I had wanted to hear when we were together. I wanted him to be strong, to protect us, to stop letting her dictate our lives. But hearing it now, months after the damage had been done, it felt hollow. Weeks after Ethan sent that message about confronting his mother, I heard nothing from him. It was like he had disappeared into his own struggle, leaving me with the quiet certainty that I had made the right choice. The silence wasn't as painful anymore. In fact, it was soothing. One afternoon, I was at the park, sitting on a bench, when I saw a familiar face walking toward me. It was Ethan. His eyes were tired, but there was a certain resolve in his posture. He approached slowly, like he wasn't sure if he should even be there. "Hey," he said, standing a few feet away. He didn't reach for a hug or try to touch me, which for once felt like the right move. I did it. I raised an eyebrow, a little confused. Did what? I had the talk with my mom. His voice dropped a little, almost as if he was expecting me to react negatively. It wasn't easy, but I told her that I needed to start living my own life. I can't keep letting her control me. I didn't respond immediately, letting the silence hang between us. I wanted to believe him, I really did, but I also knew that words were easy and actions were harder. My mind drifted back to all the times he'd promised change, but nothing had come of it. "Good for you," I finally said, my tone calm but not overly excited. "I'm glad you did that." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sorry for everything, for not seeing you, for not standing up for you when you needed me. I wish I could have done more." I nodded, feeling the weight of his apology, but at the same time feeling distant. I had let go of this relationship in ways he hadn't even realized. His words no longer carried the same meaning to me. They felt like echoes of the past, things that had been said but never acted upon. "It's too late, Ethan," I replied quietly. "You can't undo the past. I needed you when it mattered, and you weren't there." His face faltered for a moment, but I could see something in his eyes. Regret, sure, but also something else, a recognition that it was over. "I know," he said, his voice softer than before. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could fix everything. But you couldn't fix me," I said, my voice firm but calm. "You couldn't fix us. We weren't broken because of your mom. We were broken because you didn't know how to choose me. I wasn't your priority, Ethan." He swallowed hard, his face a mix of pain and understanding. "I get it now. I was selfish." "You were," I said, nodding slowly. "And I can't keep giving pieces of myself to someone who's not willing to give me the whole of them." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Felt like a soft goodbye, not loud or dramatic, but just the end of something that had stretched too long. "I'll always care about you," he finally said, his voice a little shaky. "I hope you find happiness." "I already have," I replied, standing up from the bench and giving him one last look. "And I think that's the most important thing of all." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, alone at the park. I didn't look back. I didn't need to.